Yes, hello, and thank you for downloading another Confessions podcast from your friends at Radio 2. More dodgy stories coming up, including a church hall horror, some ghastly ghoulish goings-on, a damnably divine debacle, and an educational evening embarrassment. Here it is. So into our collective, we welcome Mike Williams again. Now, I forget, you're certainly sort of more forgiving than Matthew.
I think I err on the more forgiving side, yeah.
Yes, and less prone to take against art students and,
yes,
and people like that.
Definitely.
Anyway, Sister Bobby and Sister Rebecca both in and ready to go, I imagine, although Bobby's looking a little bit preoccupied.
No, I was listening to what you were saying.
Excellent, very good. So this comes from Dave. Father Simon and the Constituent Collective. Having just passed through an election, a general election, my thoughts turned to this one story which makes me smile and makes me think of my dear old dad, sadly no longer with us. This is his confession. It goes back to the early 80s when I was growing up in a small town in the West Country. Now this town, like all towns in the West Country at the time, had a Conservative MP. Pretty much like now, actually, anyway. However, ours was no ordinary MP. He was a member of the cabinet. Now, on this particular day, the MP had arranged to hold one of his regular constituent surgeries in my town, and in our church hall specifically. My dad was the church warden. He was in possession of the keys to the hall and had agreed with the MP and his staff to come and open up the hall in time for the surgery to start. I came along too, as it was school holidays and an opportunity to meet someone famous and really important. The sight that met my eyes that day I will never forget. As well as the MP's ministerial car driving up our small road, a cavalcade of black Range Rovers followed. The minister clearly had a huge contingent of security guard goons that followed him wherever he went. You know the sort, men in black with dark glasses, serious-looking faces, and probably weapons under their jackets. To me, it looked like the President of the United States was in our small town. So my dad opened up the church hall, and the goons flooded inside. They were not going to let the MP come inside until they had thoroughly searched the place. They went through every room, every cubbyhole, even searching the ladies' toilets, something at the time a 10-year-old boy found quite amusing. Finally, they came to this one cupboard with a padlock on the front. "What's this?" say the goons in their goon-type voice. Obviously not the goons, because if I was doing a goon voice like Harry Seacombe, that would be a completely different experience. Anyway, "What's this?" says one of the police guys to my dad. "Oh, I'm not sure," lied my dad, knowing full well that this was the Sunday school cupboard. He didn't have the key, and he didn't want to admit that he hadn't quite expected such a thorough search of the building. "No, I don't know what's in there. We'd need to ask the caretaker." Now, coincidentally, the caretaker at this point had just walked into the hall. He was not supposed to be starting work for another hour or so, but had come in because of all the attention that the MP and his goons had been generating outside. Just as my dad said the word caretaker, the man himself walks in. "Ask the caretaker what?" says the caretaker. Well, the face of the police and presumably MI5 officers was a picture. They all looked like thunder and stared alarmingly at the caretaker. "Please open this cupboard now." Did that sound sufficiently kind of menacing in a police kind of MI5?
Yeah.
Spooks?
Fine.
That kind of thing? "Open the cupboard now," said the goon.
Getting better.
Thank you.
Was it a male caretaker?
No, that was a goon.
Oh.
That was a... Pay attention, Bobby. "Open this cupboard now." "Oh, I can't do that," said the caretaker. "That'll be the Sunday school cupboard. Only the Sunday school teacher has the key to that cupboard. You really need to wait for Mavis. You don't want to be messing with her cupboard." This was in fact the truth. My dad knew this, but he kept quiet as he was enjoying the situation that was unfolding between the 10 heavies and one small Irish caretaker. It now became apparent that the goons were doubting the credentials and reliability of the caretaker and proceeded to pick him up, and they marched him off to the car for a little bit of questioning. Sounding a little bit strange. Following a crowbar attack on the cupboard, the goons then established that the cupboard did indeed contain pens, pencils, Bibles and various booklets for Sunday school. There were Golden Bells chorus books for everyone and lots of Bible scenes to colour in if they got bored. The caretaker was duly released and the goons went back to their cars. The MP came into the hall and my dad set up his surgery and everything else went ahead without issue. So no harm really had been done apart from to the cupboard. So what we need Father Simon, if it's okay, on behalf of my dear old dad, who later said that he could probably have stopped all this commotion by explaining in the first place what the cupboard was and thinking ahead and bringing the key. We'd like to seek forgiveness, not from the caretaker, who really didn't suffer that much after his interrogation by MI5, not actually a line that you often hear in this particular feature, and probably lightened up the goon's rather boring day. But he would like to seek forgiveness from the Sunday school teacher Mavis, who did come into the hall the following week to find the cupboard door missing, the padlock missing, and the Bibles in a neat pile just in front. Anyway, she had all her stationery back, so everything was fine. The thing is, we haven't had a Sunday school confession before, and I just like the idea of caretakers, I like the idea of church wardens, and I like the idea of Sunday schools being mentioned along with MI5 and the goons, because I suspect it's about the only one. Thank you, Dave, very much indeed for your tale. What do you think there, Sister Rebecca?
Yeah, I think the reason this confession is great is because the overreaction of the MI5 goons, these 10 goons, and this tiny little caretaker, who they picked up. I mean, that is an overreaction, isn't it? And
well, I think so. I think they were different times.
And the fact they used the crowbar to open this cupboard, which was probably quite small.
With Bibles and
probably too small to have somebody in it with a lock on the outside. I mean, for goodness sake, who was this man anyway? I suppose we could, work it out by looking at who was a cabinet member in the West Country.
Well, it was probably in the original, but it has been redacted.
Anyway, I
reasons.
think it is a wonderful image of all these people and attacking a small cupboard with a crowbar. So for that reason, I'm going to forgive.
There could be a whole episode of Spooks in this. I'm going to send the script onwards in case they need to make any more episodes. What do you think there, Bobby?
Well, only if we can use the goons, the actual voices of the goons. One thing I was going to say about this is, was this a very popular MP? And were they just...
Well, he was voted for. So.
Well, it's just that they were sweeping the room for what? What did they expect to find?
I think he had an important job, Bobby.
Yeah, well... Was it going to be a bomb there? Was there explosives? The thing is what Dave's dad did is made full use of those workers. They were there, they were employed, they were being paid for, so he made full use of them and for his own good fun, and I wouldn't really mind. So absolutely forgive him for your sense of fun.
What do you think then, Brother Michael?
I'm just staggered at the far-reaching arm of the Secret Service. We're used to MI5, as you say, in Spooks, fighting international terror, money laundering, not crowbarring into Mavis's Sunday school cupboard. But yeah, staggered by that, but absolutely you've got to forgive Dave.
I think you absolutely have to do some forgiveness there. Hello there, Father Simon and the jury. This is where you say hello back, by the way, jury.
Hello.
Hi, Dean.
Hello.
Thanks very much indeed. I've been listening to Radio 2 for quite some time now, but couldn't persuade my wife to convert from local radio. On a recent trip back to Edinburgh from Penrith, myself and my wife were listening to Drive Time on Radio 2. I can't remember the confession that day, but my wife thought it was completely hilarious. I then told her about my favourite Drive Time confession from your show, which was when the rogue bus-sized piece of satellite was falling to Earth, and the confessor made a NASA satellite from an old washing machine and threw it into an annoying neighbour's garden. Anyway, again, my wife was laughing and she was in tears. Anyway, she then prompted me to write in my own confession to you about a certain heating installation back in the 90s. She is a Radio 2 listener now, so we welcome you. But we've changed Dean's name, so she might not be none the wiser. Anyway, me and my buddy Paul, we're heating engineers, were contracted to install new gas central heating in a bungalow in a small village in east central Scotland. We arrived on the Monday morning. The gentleman who owned the house explained that he wanted one particular gas pipe to be run from below the floor, up through a pipe box in the kitchen, into the attic, across the attic, and then drop down through a lounge cupboard to serve a gas fire in the lounge. He then left the house, said he'd be back about 5 o'clock. Around 2 p.m. there was a knock at the front door. Paul was in the attic at the time. I was in the kitchen, so I made my way to the front door and opened it. A young woman introduced herself as the owner's work colleague and told us that the man had died at his work. The instruction she gave us, which was apparently the instruction from all the family, was to carry on with the job as planned. And she gave us a set of keys so we could gain access the next day. We couldn't believe it, really, because he looked completely fine before he left. But anyway, they were the instructions, and so we carried on. The next day, we were both back at the job, as instructed. And once again, Paul was back in the attic installing some heating pipework. I had just finished putting a copper gas pipe through the ceiling into the attic for Paul to connect to. It was then that I had an unforgivable urge. An urge to cause havoc. I decided to whisper some words up through the gas pipe into the attic. And it came out a bit like this. I am still here. I will always be here. Carry on with the work. Finish your work. I'm sorry I can't see you again. Remember me. I will always be with you. Anyway, something like that.
That's amazing.
Bit scary at the end.
Yeah, sorry about that.
From The Hobbit.
Sorry about that. Well, I don't think I had ever heard anything like what happened next. I heard a high-pitched scream followed by a pipe-bending machine falling, more screams, crashing, falling, even more screams, and then footsteps crashing down the metal attic ladder. In the meantime, I had manoeuvred myself to another part of the house. I walked out of the bedroom and said, "What on earth's going on?" or words to that effect. There, in a heap on the hall carpet floor, at the foot of the attic ladder, was Paul, puffing and panting, looking like he'd seen or heard a ghost. He tried to explain what he'd heard whilst wiping beads of sweat from his forehead. I asked him if he was trying to scare me because I didn't like what he was saying, making it sound a little bit more authentic. He was desperately trying to convince me that the dead guy had spoken to him and he'd apologised for dying, and he said that we had to finish the job. He also convinced me that under no circumstances was he going to that attic ever again. Anyway, Father Simon, I need forgiveness for this awful few minutes of badness. I'm not normally a prankster. I just felt the urge to scare Paul. I suppose I was punished slightly, as Paul didn't do anything at all for the remainder of that job, apart from look into wardrobes and cupboards, spooked out of his wits. I'm very sorry, Paul, and he doesn't know until this day that actually it wasn't the dead man. It was actually me downstairs just blowing into the pipes. Anyway.
That was very funny and very well done as well. But it's a bit odd, isn't it? My precious. The way that this co-worker just casually informed the heating engineers that their client had died. It's very odd.
Just carry on.
And then, I mean, in a way, you kind of think, have you no respect for the dead to do that? On the other hand, it's great that they had a sense of humour about it. So I think, on balance, very funny, and I'm going to forgive.
Okay, forgiveness. What about Sister Bobby from the Priory there? What do you think?
Well, you could say it's always important to laugh in the face of death. That's your only
you can say that.
defence. I'm saying sometimes. I think Dean's wife is a very lucky woman, married to Dean. I think it's inspired, and you're absolutely forgiven. Even though Paul could have injured himself, he could have been frightened out of ashes forever. But
he was just confronted with this, effectively a mouthpiece going into the biggest kind of horn of all time, and it just went all the way up the house, through the attic, and out the other side.
Forgiven.
All right, I think people are going to be quite generous here. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I'm just trying to imagine the terror of Paul alone in a dark, cramped attic,
Exactly.
and you just hear this voice. It's just terrifying.
Continue my work.
I mean, I agree with the others. There is a taste and decency issue, I suppose, about mocking the death, but you'd like to think the owner of the house, although sadly departed, would have been looking down and laughing along. So forgiven, perhaps. Forgiven.
So it's another confession here. And this one is from Brian. Thank you, Brian. Dear Forgiving Father team and the Saintly Sisters of Serenity. And you're included in that, Mike.
Right, yeah.
You're an honorary,
Okay.
you're an honorary sister.
Thank you, I'll take that.
My name is Brian, and my confession has a religious theme and concerns a visit to the lovely Belgian city of Bruges and the Heilig Blood Basilisk, the Catholic Basilica of the Holy Blood. My wife and I were in Bruges for a relaxing long weekend, as people tend to, seeing the sights and generally being tourists. Before settling into the wonderful Half Moon Brewery and a well-deserved glass or three of Bruges Zot. Now, I've never had a Bruges Zot, but my guess is it's going to be quite potent. What would you think? 8%?
Definitely.
Something like that. We were looking around the wonderful medieval buildings of the two main squares in the city. Being a fully paid-up member of the Geek Tourist Squad, I'd bought a guidebook before we left. This described a beautiful-sounding church off the corner of one square, the Basilica of the Holy Blood. This church contains a golden casket, inside which is a sealed glass phial, allegedly containing a few drops of blood plundered by the Crusaders during the 11th or 12th century. Different times.
Very different.
Deciding that this church would be interesting to visit and admire its architecture, we went in. The church itself is up 2 flights of uneven stairs. This information is important for what happened later. Now, a few times a day, the golden casket is brought out. Actually, it's quite Pythonesque, actually. A golden casket is brought out to allow believers to worship it and touch it or kiss it, whatever they want to do. We entered the church to discover that this ceremony was underway. We therefore quietly took seats at the back of the church and watched people approach the priest holding the casket, reverently touching it and then moving on. A quick flick through the guidebook told me that it was believed that touching the casket would cure illnesses and disability. Although I'm not religious, there was definitely something moving about the calmness and serenity of the service. After 10 to 15 minutes, the ceremony finished, prayers were said, and people started to leave the church. We stood and had a look around the church, and then we too headed back out. Now, one thing I haven't explained is that I have a slight but permanent physical disability, going by the long-winded term of peripheral neuropathy. I have no sense of touch in my legs, which means I can only go up or down stairs one at a time, holding on to the handrails for support. And, dear Father Simon, it was as I was limping slowly down the stairs from the church that the moment I seek confession for occurred. As we were descending, there was a sizable group of elderly ladies starting to come up the stairs. Remembering that the casket allegedly had healing powers, I said, "I wouldn't bother if I were you. I was walking fine when I came in."
No.
Unfortunately, this made my wife laugh out loud, immediately followed by her slapping her hand across her mouth and trying not to giggle. But by this time, I was also trying not to laugh, so we descended the final stairs, holding on to each other and barely suppressed laughter. This was not helped by the evil looks that we got from the ladies who were coming up the stairs. We got to the bottom of the stairs and collapsed in a giggling heap on a handily positioned public bench. Father Simon, I seek forgiveness both from the group of ladies as well as the good people of Bruges, whose beautiful city we also appeared not to be taking seriously. My comment was intended merely to mock myself, which I find a useful way to cope with the daily annoyances that a minor disability throws at me. Well, it was one of those things. Clearly he hadn't planned it. He seized the moment and he thought an irreverent comment would go down rather well, as it did with his missus. But maybe not with the ladies who were coming up to pay their respects. Anyway, let's see what the holy collective here make. So, saintly Sister Rebecca, what do you make of
Bruges
that?
is an interesting place because I've been there and they play music on the streets and it's all very jolly and a bit weird, actually. It's like being in a museum or something.
Particularly if you've had a well-deserved glass of
Exactly.
Bruges.
Now, I think that is a hilarious confession. He's got a fantastic sense of humour, and to be able to laugh at his disability, as he said, is even better. I'm sure these ladies who are coming up the stairs saw the funny side. Well, if they didn't, then, that's their problem. So I'm going to forgive you.
All right, that's very good. Sister Bobby, she's from the Priory.
Oh, it's really difficult. I feel a sitting on a fence moment coming on, because you wouldn't want to offend the beliefs of others, would you? Generally, you don't want to. But in Bruges this is my get out. In Bruges is one of my favourite films ever.
Right.
It's dark comedy.
And so therefore,
because you were in Bruges, and I do like your sense of humour, I'm going to forgive you.
that is the most ridiculous
Just because it's really difficult.
bit of reasoning
Because
of
if
all
someone's
time.
in a spiritual place,
Because you
and
like
they've-
the movie In
well,
Bruges,
it's
you're
just,
going to forgive.
it's just really. I would hate to offend anyone.
All right, let's see what young Mike makes of it.
Yeah, I take Bobby's point. You've got to be sensitive to other people's beliefs, but never having been to Bruges and never having been to this basilica, we didn't know what the reaction of this group of ladies was, whether they went up to the casket after being told that it was no use visiting it, and yeah, I love the sense of humour, and it was a spur-of-the-moment decision.
Yes.
I forgive.
All right. Right, well, we're all gathered. Here we go with Doris's confession. Thank you, Doris. Dear Ken and Lynn and Thingamy-Bob, which is funny and relevant. My misdemeanour took place in the early 1980s when I was a maths teacher in a large school. In our maths department, we all took our share of sets, ranging from exam groups to pupils who needed more help, and of years ranging from 11-year-olds up to 18-year-olds. So in 1 week, I could have a mixture of abilities and ages, numbering over 200 different pupils and names. But of course, this presented a number of challenges. As a parent, I'm sure you've done the Parents' Evening or Parents' Consultation Evening. Is that right? Is that what it's called?
Oh,
Parents'
yes.
Consultation. The thing is, being on this show, you kind of miss most of them.
Yeah.
So, which is a bit of a... Do you manage
We
to
have them
make
in the
any?
afternoon.
See, we
So
don't have that.
can
The
make them.
flexi time, you see now, you can pick a time. That's cool.
See, and Mike, actually, that's not going to be an issue for you, is it?
Not yet, no.
Still thinking about it and planning.
You
aren't
probably did them by video link these days, couldn't you, Parents' Evening?
This is a very, very... That's a very young technical thought,
FaceTime.
that is. Anyway, so Parents' Evening. Because in 1 year I sometimes had 2 different sets, I had to get through over 8 class loads of parents, if they all attended. This particular year, they all did attend, and by the end of the evening, I really did need that drink in the pub with the rest of the staff. Well towards the beginning of the evening, the parents of a rather naughty boy turned up. Let's call him John Smith. And I was able to explain to them that he wasted his time and that of the others in the group by his messing about. And he had the brains, but he just wasn't using them. He was a disappointment and letting everybody down. Well, Father Simon, his parents looked mortified and said they'd be having stern words when they got home. Then about 2 hours later, the parents of my star pupil, also called John Smith, sat down before me and I sang his praises, telling them how well he was doing. His folks looked absolutely thrilled and not a little surprised and said they'd be getting John a very special present for being such a good boy. It was much later in the pub when thinking about it and how strange the reaction of his parents had been that I realised to my horror that I had, of course, transposed the boys and told the wrong information to both sets of parents about their sons. That's why the first John's parents had been crestfallen and the second parents so pleased. I've always had a problem, along with a lot of other people, I think, mainly mums and grandmas, of muddling up names and sometimes completely forgetting them. I can't be the only teacher at a parents' evening to find him or herself talking about completely the wrong child to completely the wrong parents, but I don't think I'd done it before, says Doris. Well, I spent a sleepless night thinking of the harm I'd done, and what the parents of John 2 were saying to their son about his schoolwork, what a false impression I'd given about the abilities of John 1. Would they complain to the head? Would I be sacked? I went to work the following day, wondering what would happen. Well, Father Simon, the answer is precisely nothing happened. Lessons carried on as usual, and nothing was said by either boy ever. John 1, though, did look a little bit crestfallen. John 2 did look very happy and tried to shake my hand. The longer I left it, though, the more difficult it became to say anything. And so I didn't. But here we go. I need forgiveness for this crime and can only say in mitigation that I sometimes see John 1 driving about town in one of his fleet of vans that belonged to his successful building company. And the last I heard of John 2 was that he'd gained a first in maths from Warwick University. As you know, one of the best universities for the study of maths and indeed history and politics, I'd just like to say, particularly between the years of 77 and 1980. Perhaps my comments had spurred both boys on, you think, Doris? Anyway... yes, spurred both boys on. Number 1, because he'd been told he was more capable, and 2, because he'd been told to do even better. I still have problems with names, but I only have 1 husband, 2 sons and 3 grandchildren, so it's much easier problem to deal with now. Now, I reckon that a lot of teachers were going, I did that, I did precisely that, I said the wrong thing to the wrong parent, got the kids mixed up, and I never said anything with hilarious consequences. If so... I'd like your parents' evening confessions. Anyway, meantime, let's check on the verdicts here, Sister Rebecca.
I'm quite surprised. I mean, I would have thought the teachers generally would know which parent was the parent of each child. Yeah, hundreds of them. I mean, maybe it was the first one of the year. I suppose that's understandable in a way. And I think it's extraordinary that nothing happened. Nobody said anything, which makes you think, what is the point in those consultations anyway? I think it was a bit dangerous because she could have set the good John Smith on the wrong path. I mean, he could have got really depressed because he'd been trying hard and was just told he was rubbish and therefore had decided, not to try ever again.
Yes.
But she was lucky that he did turn out to be quite successful. But I think she was lucky and I think she should have said something. So I'm not forgiving.
Not going to forgive.
Nope.
I reckon school reports and end of term in general will lead to a few confessions if you've got one. What do you think, Novice Nigel?
It's a proper conundrum. I can't believe the parents of John 1 didn't say, really, this flies in the face of all his other...
Not like we've been told by every other teacher.
Yeah, everyone, and also every year before here he's done brilliantly, and suddenly now it's catastrophic with you. Didn't come out, which is but anyway, great that John 2. Maybe it gave him the fillip in life that he wanted, and he got into easy entry Nottingham University as a result. Well, everyone else was at the time.
That's not an easy entry.
Came up for that like a rising trout. I think you actually, Doris, by keeping stum, you might well have really inspired both Johns, and a brace of Johns and a brace. So I'm actually remarkably going to forgive you.
You're going to forgive. OK, well, let's see how Brother Mike makes it.
Having grown up with both parents who were teachers, had lots of experience of Parents' Evening, I can have big sympathy for Doris, because like you say, I'm sure teachers up and down the land have made the same mistake, but I just can't help feeling sorry for poor old John 1, because I remember as a child the dread that I would feel at home waiting for my parents to come back from Parents' Evening. Not that I was particularly badly behaved, but you never knew what was being spoken about behind your back, so I feel for poor John 1, despite him going on to be successful. It was a brilliant story, but like Rebecca, I cannot forgive, I'm afraid.
OK, thank you. Well, they were the confessions then for this week. It may well be that one of them sparked a thought, a little glimmer of guilt in your soul. If you've got a story, tell us. confessions@bbc.co.uk. You'll feel so much better for it. Anyway, more in a week, and the Weekly Mayo available to download now. Thank you very much indeed. John Cleese is on that.